Welcome back to White Sox Weekly here on ESPN 1000. I'm Connor McKnight. Our guest is White Sox General Manager Rick Hahn. Rick, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate the chance to chat.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Connor.
You got it. Let's start with the headlines, right? I mean, play the hits. The White Sox had a huge rookie debut last night. Of course, I'm talking about Yermín Mercedes going 5 for 5. 3 of those hits in 2-strike counts, each one better than the last. I don't know if you were listening to Len and DJ, but DJ called the hit before his first AB. I wonder if you were also feeling a big night for Yermín Mercedes.
You know, it was exciting for all of us, but I think in large part because we've been able to see how much Yermín has been through to get to this point and how much it meant to him. Was actually with Yermín when we informed him that he was making the opening day roster, and although he did have a short stint with the big league club last year, just seeing the pure joy on his face is something that just never gets old. And everyone in White Sox Nation got to see it last night grow with each successive hit over the course of his pretty spectacular debut.
So Mercedes is a minor league Rule 5 pickup for the White Sox. I was looking through his baseball reference page and saw that he did some time in the Pecos League and crushed. Did you guys have reports on his Pecos League play? How deep does the scouting go on a minor league Rule 5 guy?
We do extensive coverage of the Pecos League. I mean, that's like very important portion of our coverage. No, in all seriousness, he deserves a world of credit for what he did in that league, because that's often a place that guys go for sort of last resort, and there's not much getting out of there, much less getting to the big league. So he put himself back on the map after getting released by Washington. Obviously, as you pointed out, dominated that level and wound up getting himself back in affiliated ball with Baltimore. And it was when he was with Baltimore in A-ball that one of our former pro scouts, a guy by the name of John Taminia, filed some fringe prospect level reports on him. And Dan Fabian, our director of pro scouting, who coordinates the pro scouts for us, also asked Doug Lauman when he was off doing some winter ball coverage to lay eyes on him as well. And between those two reports and some of the things that our analytics group pointed out, it seemed like a pretty obvious choice for us in the minor league phase of the Rule 5, which is the lesser known and less expensive phase, and one that doesn't really carry any restrictions with where you assign the player. So Yermín joined us, picked up where he left off in A-ball, and then continued to climb up the ladder and got himself on the 40-man and ultimately into the big leagues.
I'm talking with White Sox General Manager Rick Hahn here on White Sox Weekly. You guys did have Andrew Vaughn make his debut. It's funny. There were so many things in last night's game that kind of overshadowed the next, and yet each one is a giant headline for this franchise. When you guys put Andrew Vaughn in left field, when Tony has Yermín Mercedes in the lineup, some of that is obviously Zach Collins too. Some of that is all potentially because Eloy Jimenez isn't with the club. Is there, in some small way, Rick, a silver lining in that Tony has a chance to put some carrots out there for some of the young hitters that they can go earn, even on a team that is competing for a division title?
Yeah, I would definitely put it as a small silver lining to the Eloy injury. Certainly, everyone's preference would be to have Eloy healthy and playing out in left field for us every day. But his absence over the next several months is going to create opportunities. And you're absolutely right in that the odds were against having both Yermín and Andrew in the same lineup if Eloy was healthy. So this is a chance for Yermín to show what he can do. Zach Collins obviously got some DH at bats the first day. All 3 of those players are in the lineup tonight. And, we're going to have a chance to see some of our higher ceiling prospects hopefully take advantage of this opportunity here. We talked a little bit about scouting as it pertains to Yermín, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this opening day roster of ours actually has 6 of our own former first-round picks, starting with Tim Anderson and going through Garrett Crochet from last year. And it's exciting to see the fruits of our scouts and our player development people's hard work over the last several years, bearing fruit here now. And you don't want to see an injury ever. But as you point out, there is a little silver lining in that some of these younger talents are getting the opportunity to showcase what they're capable of doing here over the next several months.
Rick, when you guys make the call to try Andrew Vaughn in left field, can you walk White Sox fans through what that decision process looks like from the entire brain trust? Who gets consulted? What guy do you call that went from first to the outfield before? I mean, there are connections in Major League Baseball all over the place. I would imagine that there's someone that you reached out to that had a very similar transition.
Well, keep in mind this transition actually began last year. This was something that we had talked about, knowing how we were going to line up, obviously with the reigning MVP returning to first base for us this year. We talked about different ways to potentially get Andrew's bat into the lineup, and one of those was on an outfield corner. So Chris Getz and Doug Sisson out at the Schaumburg alt site last year spent a decent amount of time with Andrew, putting him through drills and seeing what he was capable of doing out there. It wasn't obviously something that we publicized, but it was something we wanted to get a look at and at least have in our back pocket should the roster permutation lead to that being the best route to getting him ABs. Now, obviously, it's no secret the way we originally drew this team up on paper, there wasn't going to be that type of opportunity for Andrew this year. But once Eloy got injured, we sat in our staff meeting with all of Tony's staff and the front office group and the player development group and talked through what people had seen from Andrew and what they felt, not only from an athleticism standpoint, but from a baseball IQ standpoint, and perhaps most importantly, from a makeup standpoint about whether a guy could handle learning a new position and transitioning to the offensive expectations that come with being a big leaguer. And perhaps as talented as Andrew is on the field, perhaps his greatest trait is that makeup. And he certainly is someone that we feel is not only up to the task athletically and skill-wise, but has the mental toughness to make it work. So, again, we'll see how much he's out there. Today he's out there for the second night in a row, and perhaps that will continue to be the trend over the next several weeks. But for now, it's a matter of getting his bat in the lineup and Tony sort of mixing and matching until he settles into a regular routine for the left field vacancy.
On any other night, Michael Kopech making his return to the mound for the first time since 2018 and then getting the win in the scorebook is the first thing I ask you about. What went through your head, Rick, watching Michael Kopech work for the first time on a big league mound since 2018?
It was great to see. I mean, we've obviously been able to see him over the last several weeks in Arizona, so we knew how the ball was coming out of his hand, and we knew how dynamic multiple pitches were working for him over the course of the last several weeks in spring. But it really wasn't until the lights went on, as they did last night, and we got to see him against a difficult Angels lineup, that you truly felt like he was all the way back. And quite candidly, was thrilled with the performance and the output that we got out of him over the 2+ innings. But I was probably a little happier simply for Michael that he had made it all the way back and that overcome the injury and the time off last year to be an important contributor on what we think is a real good team. That's a great accomplishment for Michael, and knowing personally what he's gone through over the last few years, going back to the injury, just makes you all the happier for him. And obviously, it's a great result for this team.
I know you and Tony La Russa have talked about how to use Michael Kopech, how everybody wants to use Michael Kopech, but did you expect him to come out against Trout after 2 clean innings and 3 strikeouts and 6 batters? I mean, where are you at on that?
I was sitting there, my 15-year-old Charlie and I were watching the game together, and we were talking about whether we'd bring Michael back out to face Trout. And watching it, given the way he was throwing, I was all for the idea if it was like any other player in baseball, basically, except for Trout. That's what scared me. But I'm glad that Tony showed the confidence in him. And I think even though he wound up walking him in the end, I think it's going to serve Michael and this team well over the long term to show that level of confidence in him. And, Michael to compete against the best there is in his first outing, I think is only going to make him more confident over the course of the summer and hopefully into the fall.
I'm glad you touched on the confidence part, Rick. I did want to ask you about it. And I know it's only been 2 games, so I hope you'll let me kind of overreact just a little bit. It's what
That's
we're
your right as
to
a baseball
do here.
fan, Connor, please.
Yeah, exactly. Tony's great with the bullpen moves. He trusted Foster. He trusted Kopech. Cody Hoyer on opening night got trust. Is that something that you guys had planned on instilling in these young kids at points during the season? Are you at all surprised that it happened so early? I guess I should probably stop asking the GM of the team if he's surprised necessarily about how his manager is bringing guys out of the pen. But, it is early, and you don't often see managers of the Hall of Fame caliber go to rookies in that I shouldn't say just rookies, but go to young pitchers in that fashion.
You touched on it right at the start of the question, and that is Tony has always been masterful in terms of his handling of bullpens. Innovative, going back to his usage back in the 80s. So it doesn't shock me that he has been, again, it's been 2 days, but over those 2 days he's definitely managed the talent that he's had out there. That really is one of the many positives of having Tony, run at the helm in game. So it's great to see it in action. It is consistent, though, with not only his history, but also with what we've discussed over the last several months in terms of deploying this pen. Really, I guess you could call, obviously, Liam's a veteran and Bummer's a veteran, and you would call, Evan Marshall a young veteran as well. But it is basically a pretty young pen overall, even with those guys. So it was going to be a matter of figuring out who he could trust and where and deploying them accordingly. But the short answer is no, I'm not surprised, given his history and the conversations we've had, that he's handled it so well here over 2 fairly tight games over the first 2 nights.
White Sox general manager Rick Hahn, our guest here on White Sox Weekly. Rick, again, 2-game caveat, but just one wart in those 2 games. Defense has had a couple errors that have led to 5 unearned runs. Those relievers we've talked about have been, honestly, pretty great in working around as much as they could. Early season jitters, kind of write that off sort of thing. How do you feel about where things have, how the ball's fallen a little bit so far?
Yeah, I think it's just probably a byproduct of a small sample. Certainly, if there were some miscues in left field, we would understand that. Given that we have guys playing there who aren't used to being out there quite so much. When you see Adam Eaton, who's a Gold Glove caliber player out there, or Moncada, who is a Gold Glove finalist, or the year that Jose was coming off defensively last year, involved in misplays, that's, I think, just the randomness of the game. I don't think that's anything that long-term we're going to need to be concerned about with those individuals. Obviously, we want to tighten that up as quickly as possible. You don't want to be adding, extra pitches, much less extra runs on that the other team hasn't earned. So it's certainly a priority to get tightened up. But when you're looking at where those errors are coming from over the first 2 nights, I don't think it's an area of long-term concern.
Rick, do you know the Robert Redford gif where I think it's the Jeremiah Johnson movie, and he just gives that kind of knowing nod online? You've seen this one?
I don't think I know that. Oh, yeah, where he's off in the woods and he gives the nod, yeah,
exactly.
With the long hair. Absolutely.
Yes, it's that very he knows. This was a good job. This was top-notch. I had that reaction to Luis Roberts at bat prior to Abreu's homer. He goes 2-0. He takes big cuts at 2 breaking balls, trying to do something for his team down 1, reels it back in, a very patient finish to the at-bat, works a walk, and Jose Abreu goes yard. Is that in some way emblematic of how you'd like to see him grow? Is that actual growth in front of us? It was a big moment in last night's game. No,
it was huge, and I'm glad you pointed it out, because it absolutely is emblematic of the type of growth we expect to see from Luis. I mean, look, you back it up a little bit, a couple of ABs. His last one, the previous night, opening night against Iglesias, he got carved up with 3 sliders out of the zone. He looked like he was swinging from the second he walked up from the on-deck circle. So for him, in a matter of essentially 2 ABs, to transition in a big situation to a more disciplined approach, knowing the game situation, knowing who's behind him, I think is a great sign of what lies ahead when he continues to develop as an offensive player. It's something to keep in mind. We do have a fairly young group out there. There are going to be growing pains. There are going to be points of regression and points of growth over the course of the summer. But it's important, as you just did, to highlight those points of growth when they do come out, because that was a great at bat and a key one to winning that ball game last night.
I want to talk a little bit about a veteran on this squad, though. Dallas Keuchel had the start. I might be misremembering a little bit about Dallas's spring, but he was in that one game where he was pitching, he came out, he came back in as per the new rule. It seemed like all of his post-game pressers, or I guess they're in-game pressers, were kind of like, I'm working to feel it, I'm not quite where I want to be exactly yet. Is that fair to say he's still trying to get to exactly where he wants to be at this point? Is he just a touch behind? It looked like he was wrestling the cutter a little bit last night.
Yeah, he got into a little bit of trouble with the command at one point last night. I don't see him necessarily as behind, so to speak. He didn't make quite as many outings over the course of the spring as, say, Giolito or Cease. But he's a veteran, and he's sort of on his own program in terms of trying to keep him strong over the course of the entire year, and he's certainly not someone you worry about when it comes to being prepared for when the bell rings. So nothing too great. You're right from the standpoint that he didn't quite have the innings load in spring that some of the other guys did, but I don't think that necessarily really had much impact on his performance last night. And 5 days from now he's got the Mariners, and I think he's going to be just fine for that.
I would imagine that you and the rest of your staff are in pretty constant communication with the offices at MLB as it regards vaccinations, and with everybody here in Illinois as well, with you guys coming back sooner rather than later. Any news on that front? Anything that's changed some, or is status quo kind of status quo?
It's still a work in progress. It's still in queue. Obviously, being on the road makes it a little more difficult. It's something that we obviously want to address in the near future, but we'll very likely won't be able to address until the team's back in Chicago. So we're hopeful. Working with the powers that be, that we'll be able to get something queued up here in the not too distant future for the club. As I've noticed over the first few days, some of the clubs that have opened at home have been able to do, thankfully. So hopefully we're not too far behind, and as soon as that's in place, we'll make it known publicly.
Tony spoke about MLB moving the All-Star game last night, and he made sure to underline how important it is that Hank Aaron be celebrated. Obviously, everyone agrees with that. Tony makes a great point there. I wonder how you were notified of that decision, Rick.
You know what? I found out the same way you did. I'm guessing the same way you did, and that was via the MLB press release. I obviously knew that it was under consideration, but didn't realize that the decision was going to come out when it did. So I found out the same way you did, and I obviously don't speak for the White Sox organization on this. It's a larger issue than just me, but I can, speaking for myself, I certainly agree with Tony. I think it's a fantastic move and important to continue with the original intent of celebrating Henry Aaron when the ultimate plans are put in place.
Indeed. One more news item, Rick, and then we'll wrap it up. I really appreciate you hanging out with us on White Sox Weekly. I've read reports that the draft has a round number set at 20. Are you able to say whether that's accurate? And regardless of whether or not we're there yet in our plans, you guys will for sure go from a 40-round draft to 5 and then some third number. So I'm wondering what the real important bullet points for you guys are, as that's a lot of shifting around in just 3 seasons.
It's a lot of shifting around, but at the same time, really the challenges last year were slightly less with the number of rounds than it was with the lack of views. And by that I mean, Mike Shirley and his staff. The work obviously doesn't begin scouting for the amateur draft just with the most immediate season. They do have, previous fall ball work or the previous summer work on many of these guys. Certainly the college guys we go back a number of years on. But it does put you at a little bit of a disadvantage when you don't have that, most recent look to see how a guy has continued to develop. it, quite candidly, makes the Mike and his staff's recommendation of Garrett Crochet even more remarkable, given that he only threw something like 4 innings last year as an amateur, but was still able to, come so quickly to the big leagues and seemingly be an impact talent going forward. So that was more of the challenge for our guys. We'll adjust to whatever amount of rounds there are and to the rules accordingly. And last year, between Crochet and Kelly in the first 2 rounds, we couldn't be happier with the 5 guys that we wound up being able to secure. And regardless how many rounds it's this year, we look forward to hopefully coming away with a similar haul.
Rick, appreciate it as always. Great talking baseball with you. And I would imagine, I don't know how Tony's exactly got the bullpen set, but knowing that Crochet didn't pitch in the first 2 nights, I wouldn't be too surprised if we're watching him throw tonight, which should be fun. Thanks again.
Hey, thanks for having me, Connor. Be well.
You got it. White Sox General Manager Rick